Somebody asked a good question. What do you do when you eat out? Well, after y'all stay on the Cooey Challenge for 6 weeks, then you can start having grass-fed beef, free-range chickens and turkey and wild fish. You still can't have processed foods, and you shouldn't have sugar, you see. And you still should get your raw salad every day and drink your water and do your exercises, those 7 things up there. And you will have a life freer from any kind of pain and sickness. Okay? All right, now I want to talk to you about exercise. As you can see, we have a serious problem in our churches. And I'm so glad to see this church putting on a health thing, because I hate to say this, but I've ran a lot of physical fitness tests on Baptist ministers, and they were the worst conditioned, overweight minister there was. And then I looked at the Baptist church. We are the heaviest church in the league. So we really need to think about the 4-part person: mentally, physically, spiritually, and socially. So remember, if you neglect any one of those, many of you have neglected your physical, which is really messing everything up. If you get that back in line, then you can start doing the other things. So, most Christians are not developing their physical fitness. And it's sad to see that they're losing their ability to move and to do things, enjoy life. They can barely walk. It's really sad to me to see that. I want you to enjoy life. You're supposed to have a happy life. You're going to heaven. So don't try to get there too soon right now, okay? Okay. Because the whole purpose of why you're doing all this, to me, I hope, if you're not a Christian, the most important decision you can make in life is to become one or not. But then the second most important things that you need to do as a church member is that you should try to serve God as long and as best you can. And you're not going to be able to do that if you're unfit, you see. If you're overweight, you can be a good one, but you can't be the best of your potential, you see. All right. We see here in these statistics that less than 1/4 of our society exercises at least 3 days a week of Americans. That's not going to get it. We found that 60% of Americans are either obese or overweight. They're the fattest we've ever been. This is what gets me. Our school-age students, we ran a bunch of physical fitness tests on the school-age children. We ran it on body composition, speed, power, endurance. And out of the 18 countries that we tested similar to ours, we came in 18th, last. Our children are so suffering. Every time I go to the mall or something, I see the little children that are overweight, and it breaks my heart. I mean to tell you, it breaks my heart. My daughter, how'd you like to have a daddy like me? Well, she ran with me, and we ran marathons together and all that. And she had a little friend that was the most extroverted little friend when she was about 2 or 3 or 4. And then she went to elementary school and got just obese. And her whole personality changed. And it just broke my heart. She became introverted. Just shame, guilt, all kind of stuff. Made fun of. Well, I want to talk about fitness and how it works. There are two types of fitness. There's health-related fitness and what I call skill-related fitness. Health-related fitness is what we're going to look at today. They are cardiovascular endurance, muscular endurance, flexibility, and body composition. The skill-related are things like speed, coordination, power, balance, agility, reaction time. But we don't need to be fit in those. That's just your superior athlete that are fit in those. We need to turn our attention to those four: cardiovascular fitness, muscular endurance, flexibility, and body composition. Let's start with cardiovascular endurance. Cardiovascular means heart, blood vessel, blood pressure, things like that. Anything cardiovascular. Now, I've studied this, I guess probably over 40 years. And I've found some amazing things that occur to you when you become cardiovascular fit. Let's just look at your heart, what happens when you become fit. First of all, you have a lower resting heart rate. I was very lucky in my career to test the Olympic athletes, the marathon runners, the great athletes. You wouldn't believe some of the heart rates of some of these athletes. How many of you have ever heard of Dan Gable? He's a wrestling coach at Iowa, Indy. Yes, sir. In the Olympics, I was panicking. He had to wrestle the Russian for the gold medal, and nobody knew where he was. And it had 5 minutes to go. And all of a sudden, he comes in sopping wet. I said, "What have you been doing?" He says, I had to get my run in. I said, "You're wrestling for the gold medal and you're out running?" He said, "Well, I'm going to psych that guy out. He thinks I'm tired." Anyway, his resting heart rate was 29 beats a minute. I said, "What do you do, Dan, for exercise?" He says, "I run 5 miles in the morning, go to class, and wrestle for about 2 hours in the afternoon." You ever wrestle for 1 minute? And then I study and then run 5 miles at night. Now, this guy is fantastic shape. How many of you have heard of Alberto Salazar? He ran a 2:08 marathon. And Salazar had a 36 heartbeat, 36 beats a minute. But the lowest I've ever tested on any human being was Lance Armstrong, 27 beats a minute. How would you like to have a heart that beats 27 beats a minute? Just boom, and then boom. You could feel it beating in you, couldn't you? It's amazing how strong his heart was to be able to produce that. They have a lower resting heart rate than a normal person. If he would go out, if Salazar says, "Well, let's go out and we'll run a mile," and he would run the mile in 6 minutes, just running with us, his heart rate would get up to maybe 125. If we ran that, how much would our heart rate get up? 220, 250, ventricular fibrillation. We'd have really trouble. So you'll notice that when you become fit, your heart will slow down for the amount of exercise you're doing. Faster recovery time. I love these announcers. Here's this guy running a mile. And he finishes the mile and kicks the last, last lap and runs it in under 50 seconds. And he crosses the finish line. And he goes, whew. And the guy asked him, how was the mile? He said, well, on the third lap, I was a little tired. That's all he did. What would you do? You'd throw up all over him, wouldn't you? So you'll notice that you recover faster when you start exercising. You don't even get tired. You have greater stroke volume and cardiac output. You can push out more blood per beat and more blood per beat per minute. So the biggest one I've ever seen was Lance Armstrong. His stroke volume was ungodly. I've never seen any human being anywhere close to him, how much blood he pumps out in one beat of his heart. He didn't even have lactic acid being produced. And that's what stops you when you're running, if y'all have ever heard this, is the lactic acid. So you see, that's a different type of person than we are. But we don't have to do that. But there is things that you can do to get better. And you all want to get better, don't you? Do you want to go, you're getting worse? You want to get worse? Or you want to get better? I hope you want to get better, because you can serve God better when you do that. The blood. You don't believe some of the changes occur in your blood if you become fit. You have more red blood cells. The most numerous cell in the body, if you have 100 trillion, the most numerous is a red blood cell. You have 25 trillion cells. Because those 25 trillion cells have got to carry oxygen to the 100 trillion cells. You see, so you got a lot of work to do if you're a red blood cell. Salazar had about 8 million. Most Americans, men, have 5,200,000 maybe. Women is 4,800,000, something like that. But they have more red cells, so they can pick up more oxygen to create more energy, so they can run that fast. They have more hemoglobin, which creates more oxygen. When I look in a microscope at people's red blood cells, I can tell if they've exercised, because their red blood cells will be thick, and you can see it full of hemoglobin and oxygen. I look at other people that don't exercise, and you can barely make out the little membrane around the red blood cell. So you want real thick red blood cells if you're in shape. Michael Johnson, world gold medal winner. Remember him in 200 and mile run? You ought to see his blood. He's a vegetarian. And he has the best looking blood I've ever seen on any. I mean, people, you don't care about that, but I think it's great, you know. I told you I was a nerd. Okay. He calls me Dr. Dracula because I've got more blood out of him than anybody. You have more HDLs, less LDLs, lower cholesterol, triglycerides. Oh, these are all implicated in heart disease, aren't they? So these all help you to overcome heart disease. And the foods that we're eating now, and the lack of exercise, and the weight that we're putting on is embarrassing. For every 1 pound of fat that you put on your body, you need 200 more miles of capillaries to supply that 1 pound of fat. If you put on 20 pounds, that's 4,000 miles. That's from here to Paris, isn't it? Is that going to be a struggle on your heart? To pump blood through that extra capillaries? You see what your body's having to do when you get like that? Your blood vessels, you have more collateral circulation. You remember the astronaut White, that died in that plane? He died in a fire in the capsule. He was in good shape. And they did an autopsy, and they found that most of his heart was blocked, but he had tremendous collateral circulation. So the blood was going around the clogged arteries that he had. You have stronger media, which is part of the blood vessel. This gives it its strength and its flexibility to contract and help push blood along so your blood pressure is lowered when this happens. So you have lower blood pressure. Really, we're just kind of reading some of these things, but I just want you to know that this is not in vain when you become fit. Your lungs, you have greater alveoli openings in the lungs. It carries more oxygen to the body. If you can't get the oxygen in, then your red cells can't pick them up. So you have a greater oxygen intake, which you give more energy. It removes more carbon dioxide. It also slows your breathing rate down. The normal person is supposed to be 14. Most runners are around 10 to 12, as far as many times they breathe a minute. So you can do more work. Your muscular system increases in size, strength, and endurance. You have faster removal of waste products. You have more motor units that develop into you, which gives you more coordination and skill. Your endocrine system, probably the greatest thing that happens to your body is your endocrine system. Look what it does. It reduces stress that has been built up from adrenaline. How do you feel when you get through exercising? Don't you feel good? Huh? That's what it does. It releases cortisone. That's your stress hormone. Anytime I see patients, I always want to check their cortisone level. And I looked at this one lady one time. I said, "My goodness, lady, you are under a lot of stress. Your cortisone level is just sky high." And I said, "Do you have any stress?" She said, "No, I don't have any stress." "Well, tell me about yourself." She said, "Well, I just got a divorce. It says that my children just got put in jail for drugs." You don't have any stress? No. Okay. So it'll raise your BMR if you ladies are wanting to lose weight. That means you burn more energy at rest. And so you'll burn more energy while you're sitting there watching TV. That's good, isn't it? It's good to know. Well, the key is here, how do you develop cardiovascular fitness? And there are three things that you got to look at. The intensity of the exercise. I've done this in many people. I wanted to know how fast should they raise their heart rate. And I kind of found that when you're about 15 to 25, you ought to get your heart rate to about 160 beats. About 26 to 35, you ought to get it to about 150 beats. 36 to 45, you ought to get it to about 140 beats. 46 to 55, you ought to get it to about 130. 130. 56 to 65, you ought to get it up there to 120. If you're over 65, we just want you to get your heart to beat. Okay. So that'll give you an idea. Now, some of you cannot start that high. I want to make sure that you understand that. You haven't been exercising, you should never push yourself to this. You should start off slow. Who cares what it is? Long as you do it, you see. Then after a while, when you get interested in this stuff, you can start checking your heartbeat and everything. It looks good in church. You're going to... Okay. The duration of the exercise. Well, I read in a book one time, it says all the exercise you need is about 20 minutes one day a week. Well, if you ever get the urge to exercise for that 20 minutes, I hope that you go and lie down until that urge passes. That's the worst thing you can do, is exercise once a week. You got to make it kind of a consistent thing. And the least should be less than 3, but I preferably believe you ought to do it 5 days a week. Frequency, at least 3 days a week, 5 days a week, but I want you to do it, try to get it up to at least 30 minutes. So if you can walk 3 miles in 45 minutes, that would be the ideal. So see what you can do if you've been walking. Just challenge yourself a little bit. So you can see what your homework is. Now, you ought to warm up properly. Don't just get out and start running. You ought to stretch real good. Stretch your calves, your hamstrings, stretch your quadriceps, your shoulders, your back. Then you should cool down. After you get through, stretch again. I didn't do it, and I've run 20 marathons, and I can't even hardly touch my toes now. I'm really struggling to get down there. I did it wrong. But we didn't know running wasn't cool in 1968. I ran in the Boston Marathon, and we only had 250. Now there's what, 30,000? So running wasn't cool back in those days. I didn't even know how. I just had to trial and error. You ought to get a medical exam. You know, that doesn't hurt you at all. I think your doctors can look at your heart and look at your muscles in your feet and things. That's a real important thing to me. I think you ought to wear proper shoes when you exercise, especially if you have these 3 musculoskeletal problems with your feet. If you don't mind, I'd like for everybody to take off one shoe so we can see your toes. If you can take off one shoe and see your toes, we're going to have some fun in here. I know y'all don't want to do this, but this is very important. Okay, everybody look at their toe. Is your second toe longer than your first toe? If you said yes, that means you're the boss of your family. No. I've heard that, but that's not true. But don't put your shoes on yet. I'm not through. If everybody takes a shoe off at the same time, nobody will know who has stinky feet. Oh, it's over here. Right. That's called Martin's toe, and that's actually a genetically inferior foot. And the reason why is when you hit it foot strike, this big toe is not carrying its load, and it rocks to the inside. We call that pronation. You ever heard the word pronation? Pronation will cause knee problems, hip problems, back problems, just that little turn. So when you buy shoes, you ought to buy one that's tight at the ball of the foot, because your foot's too loosey-goosey. It's rocking around too much, you see. How many of you check your arch now, your medial longitudinal arch? Everybody put your foot flat on the floor and see if you can stick your finger all the way up to the second phalangeal joint, or second joint. You got a high arch. You got a high arch. How many of you have hammer toes? Because you are high arch people have hammer toes. You got hammer toes too? Well, your shoe should be loose at the ball because your feet's so tight and you see your toes coming together like that. So you need to get a shoe that's loose so it can spread out a little bit, you see. Now, let's look at this one. How many of you have hallux valgus? Hallux means the great toe. That's your big toe, okay? That's a hallux. How many of your big toe is pointing in like this and you got a big old bump right there?